Hey everyone, the moment we've all been waiting for is finally here. It's time to rig. Welcome back to Motion. This is part 3 of the Hilda Character Series playlist, where I show you step by step how to rig Hilda in Moho. In today's tutorial, we're focusing on the sweater, scarf, and skirt, making sure everything moves naturally and looks perfect. If you've been following along, you're all set. But if you're new here, be sure to check out the previous videos first. And as always, if you enjoy these tutorials, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to support the channel. Now, let's jump right in. Alright, first, I'm going to drag the timeline bar down a bit to give us more workspace. Then, I'll right-click on the Hilda group and select Quick Settings. In the settings, I'll check the Paths option and hit Apply. Now, I'll select all the layers inside the Hilda group by holding down the Shift key. Right-click on one of the layers, go to Quick Settings, check Paths again, and hit Apply. By doing this, we'll be able to see the outlines of each layer even when we're not directly on that layer. This is a super useful trick for both designing and rigging, so make sure to keep it in mind. Now, I'll right-click on the Hilda group and select Convert to Bone. This will turn the group into a bone group, allowing us to start adding bones for rigging. Now, I'll hold down the Alt key and click on one of the layers to hide all layers at once. Since I only want to work on rigging the sweater, scarf, and skirt, I'll turn those layers back on. This helps me stay focused and avoid confusion. Alright, let's temporarily hide the scarf front as well. Now, I'll select the Hilda Bone group and go to the Bone Tools tab. I'll click on Add Bone and place the first bone right between the skirt and sweater. I'll hold down the left mouse button and shift to make sure it stays perfectly horizontal. To ensure the bone is centered on the character, I'll switch to the Transform Bone tool, select the bone, and set the X-axis to 0 in the Transform Bone settings at the top. Now, I'll select the Select Bone tool, click on the bone, and go to the settings at the top to rename it. I'll call it Root Bone since it's the main bone controlling the entire character. Finally, I'll set its color to blue so it's easier to see. Looks great. Pay close attention here. Now, while still in Select Bone mode, and with the root bone selected, I'll switch to the Add Bone tool. Holding down left-click and Shift, I'll draw a new bone vertically upward from the root bone, extending it up to the scarf area. Next, I'll switch to the Select Bone tool, change the bone color to blue for better visibility, and rename it to Torso Bone. Basically, the torso bone is a child of the root bone, and the root bone acts as its parent. Alright, now pay close attention. While still using the Select Bone tool, I'll select the root bone. With the root bone still selected, I'll switch to the Add Bone tool and draw a new bone vertically downward on the skirt, holding down left-click and Shift to keep it perfectly straight. Next, I'll switch back to the Select Bone tool, go to the bone settings at the top, and name this bone Skirt Bone. I'll also change its color to red for better visibility. Just like the torso bone, the skirt bone is also a child of the root bone. Now, while still on the Hilda group, I go to the Tools section, navigate to the Layer category, and select the Layer Selector tool. With this tool, I can click on any part of the character and instantly jump to its corresponding layer. It's an awesome tool that speeds up the rigging process significantly. Alright, I'll click on Hilda's sweater with this tool. Boom, I've jumped straight to the sweater layer. I'm right on it without having to scroll through the Layers panel to find it. Just one click, and I'm exactly where I need to be. How cool is that? When layers are placed inside a group that's converted into a bone layer, a new section called Bone appears in the Tools panel. This section is used to bind bones to the layer we're working on. Once we assign a bone to the layer, and then move that bone, the layer will follow its movement. I think it's important to clarify something for beginners before moving forward to avoid any confusion. Right now, our bones aren't attached to any layer. There are two tools for binding bones to a layer. Bind Layer. This tool attaches the entire layer to a selected bone, meaning the whole layer moves with that bone. Bind Points. This tool lets us bind specific points from the layer to a bone, so only those points will move when the bone is manipulated. Now, while I'm on the sweater layer, I go to the Bone Tools panel and use the Select Bone tool to click on the bone I want to bind to the layer. Next, I select the Bind Layer tool from the Bone Tools panel and click on the chosen bone. As you can see, the bone I clicked on becomes highlighted. This means the entire sweater layer is now bound to that bone. Now, I want to bind the scarf loop layer to the same bone. First, I select the Layer Selector tool from the Layer Tools panel. Then, I click on the scarf loop layer to quickly switch to it. Next, I go to the Bone Tools panel, select the Select Bone tool, and click on the bone I want to use. Then, I switch to the Bind Layer tool and click on the same bone. See? The bone gets highlighted, meaning the entire scarf loop layer is now bound to it. Now, I want to bind the skirt bone to the skirt layer, but this time, I'll use a different method. I only want to bind the lower and middle points of the skirt to the skirt bone, leaving the upper points unbound for now. So instead of bind layer, I'll use bind points. First, I select the skirt bone using the Select Bone tool. Then, I go to the Bone Tools panel and choose the Bind Points tool. Now, I hold down the left mouse button and drag over the points I want to bind. Once they're selected, I go to the Bind Points settings at the top of the screen and click the Bind Points button. That's it. Just like that, the selected points are now bound to the skirt bone easy and smooth. Now, let's bind the upper points of the skirt. First, I hide the sweater layer so I can see and work more easily. I want to bind these upper points to the torso bone, so I start by selecting it using the Select Bone tool. Next, I switch to the Bind Points tool. I hold down the left mouse button and drag over the upper points to select them. Then, I go to the Bind Points settings at the top of the screen and click the Bind Points button. And that's it. These points are now bound to the torso bone. Now, I want to create some bones for the scarf front. First, I turn the layer back on. Then, I select the Hilda bone group to make sure I'm working inside the right hierarchy. From the Bone Tools panel, I first use Select Bone to choose the torso bone, because the bones I'm about to create for the scarf front should be its child bones and parented to it. Next, I select the Add Bone tool. While holding down Shift, I click and drag downward to create the bones in a straight vertical line. The tip of each bone should be aligned with the key points of the scarf that we created earlier. Make sure to pay attention to this alignment when drawing the bones. Now, using the Select Bone tool while holding down Shift, I select all the bones of the scarf front. To make them more visible, I change their color to purple. Before binding the bones to the scarf front, I want to reduce distractions. So, I use Select Bone to choose the sweater bone, root bone, and skirt bone, then go to the settings at the top of the screen and click the Shy Bone checkbox to temporarily hide them. Now, we can fully focus on the scarf front bones. Now, using the Layer Selector tool, I click on the scarf front to quickly switch to its layer. To keep our focus, I turn off all other layers except for the scarf front. Now, using the Select Bone tool, I select each bone one by one. Then, with the Bind Points tool, I choose the specific points I want to bind to each bone. Finally, I click the Bind Points button in the top settings to apply the binding. Let's go through this carefully. Pay close attention. Great! Now, using the Select Bone tool, I select each of the 4 scarf front bones one by one, and from top to bottom, I name them Scarf Bone 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, I go to the Hilda group and click on Show All Bones from the Bone menu to bring back the other bones. Next, let's set up a new bone structure for the skirt and inner skirt. I want to create a few pin bones for the skirt and inner skirt. Pay close attention. First, I think it's best to create 2 new points on the skirt and inner skirt. So, I go to the skirt layer using the Layer Selector, and with the Add Point tool, I create 2 new points at the bottom of the skirt. I do this while turning off Sharp Corner and turning on Show Bezier Handles and Fixed Bezier Handles options. I do the same thing on the inner skirt layer, creating 2 new points on the inner skirt. Now, using the method I taught you in the previous video, match the new points created on the skirt with the new points on the inner skirt. I copy the X and Y values from the new points on the skirt and paste them into the inner skirt points. I think it's better to add 2 more points just to the inner skirt. Using the Add Point tool, I create 2 more points on the other side of the inner skirt. Then, I go to the Hilda group and use the Add Bone tool. With just 1 click on each of the points on the inner skirt, I create a pin bone. After that, I select all the pin bones by using the Select Bone tool and holding down the Shift key. Next, from the Bone Tools section, I click on the Reparent Bone tool. With the Reparent Bone tool, we can specify which bone our bones will parent to. I want these selected pin bones to be parented to the skirt bone, so I just click on the skirt bone. As you can see, the arrows of all the pin bones point towards the skirt bone, and all the pin bones are considered children of the skirt bone. Now, I go to the inner skirt layer using the Layer Selector tool. First, I select a pin bone with the Select Bone tool. Then, using the Bind Point tool, I select the point on the layer where the pin bone is located and click the Bind Points button. This process ensures that the pin bone is bound to the selected point. Make sure to do this carefully and without rushing for each pin bone individually. Now, I switch to the skirt layer and bind the pin bones to their corresponding points on the skirt layer as well. Next, I select the Hilda group and, using the Select Bone tool, choose the skirt bone as the parent. Then, with the Add Bone tool, I create to pin bones on the middle points on both sides of the skirt. After that, I switch to the skirt layer and use the Bind Point tool to bind these pin bones to the exact points where they are positioned. As you click on the Reparent Bone tool, you can see that all pin bones are now parented to the skirt bone. If any pin bone has been mistakenly parented to a different bone, make sure to correct it. Now, I turn on the sweater and scarf layers. Then, I select the Hilda group and go to the Bone section in the Tools menu, clicking on the Bone Strength tool. This tool allows us to control how much influence each bone has on the layers. I press Ctrl-A to select all bones and set their strength to 0. Since I have already assigned each bone to specific parts of each layer, there's no need for additional influence. This tool is especially useful when working with bitmap layers rather than vector layers. Just make sure to set the strength to 0 so the bones don't affect other layers. I use the Select Bone tool to select all the skirt pin bones and change their color to yellow so they stand out and are easier to see. Now, using the Manipulate Bone tool, let's move the bones a bit to check if they work correctly. Make sure that if they don't behave as expected, the issue might be with their parenting. The sweater bone should be parented to the root bone, and the skirt bone should also be parented to the root bone. Additionally, scarf bone 1 should be parented to the sweater bone. Looks good, not bad. Now, I'll set up constraints for the bones. First, using the Select Bone tool, I select the sweater bone. Then, at the top left of the screen, I open the Bone Constraints drop-down menu. In the Constraints section, I enable the Angle Constraints option and set its range from -30 to +30. Now, I use the Manipulate Bone tool to move the sweater bone and check if the constraint works properly. It looks good to me. I'll now apply similar constraints to the other bones using the same method. Watch the steps carefully. Now, there's a problem when I manipulate the scarf bones. The sweater bone moves with them. That's because scarf bone 1 is parented to the sweater bone. To fix this, I select scarf bone 1 with the Select Bone tool. Then, at the top left of the screen, I open the Bone Constraints drop-down menu. In the Inverse Kinematics section, I enable the Ignored by IK option. Now, scarf bone 1 remains fixed, and the rest of the scarf bones move independently without affecting the sweater bone. Alright, here's how we fix this issue. When I move the scarf bones, the scarf deforms in an unpleasant way. To fix this, we need to use actions for each scarf bone and manually adjust the deformations where needed. Let's start with scarf bone 2. The key thing here is to make sure you're on the Hilda group layer before selecting any bones. So, I select scarf bone 2 using the Select Bone tool. Then, from the Actions panel on the top right, I click on the new action icon. A window pops up, I hit OK, and now an action is created for this bone. Next, I go to the timeline, set the action length to 72 frames, and move to frame 72. Using the Transform Bone tool, I move the bone to the right as far as its constraints allow. Now, I use the Layer Selector to switch to the scarf front layer. With the Transform Points tool, I manually adjust the scarf shape so it looks right in this position. Once I'm done tweaking the shape, I go back to the Actions panel and double-click Main Line to exit the action and return to the main timeline. That's it. Now, I just need to repeat the process for the remaining scarf bones. I'm not gonna explain any more since the rest of the steps are just repeats. So, watch carefully and follow along to make sure you get the hang of working with actions. Let's go! Awesome! The actions are working perfectly, and the scarf movement is fixed. One final note, to be able to move the pin bones on the skirt, you need to go to frame 1 on the timeline, and then use the transform bone tool to move them. Let's check if they're working correctly. Once we're done testing the pin bones, select the keyframes on frame 1, delete them, and go back to frame 0. Alright, that's it for rigging the sweater, scarf, and skirt for Hilda. Make sure to practice well, and if you run into any issues, drop a comment so I can help you out. I put a lot of time and effort into making these tutorials, so if you found this helpful, don't forget to support me by hitting the like button, leaving a comment, and subscribing to my channel. Also, turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when the next tutorial is out. Remember, skills are built through practice. So keep practicing and enjoy the learning process. Stay creative and full of energy. See you in the next video. Goodbye.